You don't need to sit there, Mom. This seat is for my mother.
Thanksgiving night, warm and comforting, I was setting the last plate on the table when Lydia, my daughter-in-law, brushed past me and said sharply, "You don't need to sit there, Margaret." I smiled, thinking she was joking. "Sweetheart, I've sat at the head of this table for 30 years. She met my eyes without a flicker of warmth, and before I could react, she reached for the chair and pushed it back, hard enough that I stumbled and fell to my knees.
You don't need to sit there, Mom. This seat is for my mother.
The room went silent. Daniel, my only son, froze halfway through carving the turkey. My grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe, stared wide-eyed, forks trembling in their small hands. And from across the table, Patricia Moore, Lydia's perfectly polished mother, smiled politely, as if watching a play she already knew the ending to. I had baked the pies cooling on the counter, paid for this house when Daniel and Lydia couldn't afford the mortgage, poured my life into this family, and yet, in that moment, I wasn't even worth a chair at my own table. Daniel whispered, "Mom, maybe just let her mother sit." But I raised a hand to stop him. My voice came out steady, not angry, not broken. "Of course," I said softly. "It's only a chair." As I walked toward the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the dark window, shoulders straight, eyes calm, and something inside me shifted. The woman looking back wasn't defeated. She was done. No shouting, no tears, just a quiet decision forming behind every heartbeat. This would be the last time anyone in that house told me I didn't belong. Lydia thought she'd won a seat at the table that night, but she didn't realize that within 24 hours, I'd take back everything she thought was hers. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of burnt candles and half-eaten pie, and the silence felt heavier than the humiliation itself. The chair Lydia had claimed for her mother was still slightly pushed back from the table, a crooked reminder of where I no longer belonged. My mind wandered through the years I had spent building this family's comfort brick by brick, dollar by dollar, never imagining it would someday become a weapon used against me. When Daniel was accepted into college, I had cashed out the last of the insurance money from my late husband's policy money I was supposed to keep for my own retirement because I wanted our son to have every opportunity his father dreamed of giving him. I worked 12-hour days at the small bakery I inherited, kneading dough before dawn and delivering cakes after dark, while Daniel studied to become the man I thought would carry on his father's name with pride. When Lydia came into his life, young and ambitious, I believed she was a blessing. She said she wanted to learn the business, that she had ideas to modernize things, and I saw in her the daughter I never had. I sold part of my small stock portfolio to open Ellis & Co. Bakery, a place that would belong to all of us, or so I thought. It was Lydia's dream, but it became my full-time devotion. I co-signed the loans, handled suppliers, and watched her take credit for every success. When Daniel and Lydia found a house they couldn't afford, I put my name on the mortgage, $280,000 of my savings and guarantees, because family doesn't let family struggle, or so I used to believe. Later, when Lydia insisted on opening a second location, I mortgaged my own home to secure another $150,000 loan. She called me her business angel, and I believed every word. I mistook her politeness for gratitude, her charm for love, her ambition for family. Somewhere along the way, I replaced my grief with generosity, turning widowhood into devotion. Every dollar, every late night, every aching joint had been my way of saying, "You are not alone." And yet, on Thanksgiving night, the people I had sacrificed everything for looked at me as if I were nothing but a burden. That realization cut deeper than any cruel word Lydia could have said. I had spent years building a home out of my loneliness, and they had turned it into a stage for my humiliation. The next afternoon, while the house still smelled faintly of gravy and regret, I went back to retrieve my scarf that had fallen behind the dining chair the night before. Lydia and her mother were already there, their voices floating from the living room, low and confident, the kind of tone people use when they think they own the place. I stopped in the hallway unseen, holding my breath. Patricia's voice, smooth and practiced, carried across the room. "Once the paperwork is in order, we can move the Ellis name under Moore's Delight. It'll be good branding, family heritage with a modern twist." Lydia laughed softly. "Exactly. We'll modernize everything, even the name. No one really remembers who started it anyway." That sentence felt like a knife sliding under my ribs. The name Ellis wasn't just a sign above a bakery door. It was my husband's legacy, the last piece of him still living in the world. Every recipe, every smell of cinnamon and butter had his hands in it. To erase that name was to erase him. I stepped closer, quiet as breath. Patricia continued, "Your mother-in-law will sign whatever Daniel puts in front of her. She's sentimental, not business-minded. Once she transfers the bakery under your management, we'll absorb it into the Moore's chain. You'll double profits in a year." Lydia didn't even hesitate. "That's the plan. She's getting older, and the customers already think of me as the face of the bakery. We'll make it official soon." My hands went cold. The room blurred around the edges as their words sank in. They weren't just disrespectful, they were plotting to strip away the only thing that had ever been truly mine. I heard the clink of Daniel's glass and realized he had been sitting there all along, silent. "Lydia," he said quietly, "Mom might not agree to that." Patricia laughed, the kind of laugh that dripped with pity. "Then she'll have to learn to let go. Business doesn't wait for sentiment." And Daniel said nothing more. I wanted to burst into the room and scream that this business was built from the ashes of my husband's life, that every oven, every mixer, every brick had been paid for with love and grief, not with their ambition. But instead, I just stood there, feeling the slow, steady burn of betrayal settle deep inside my chest. They were planning to erase not just my name, but my history. They were going to rename my bakery, the one my husband and I had dreamed up on a scrap of paper the week before he died. I slipped out before they could see me, my heart pounding like I'd run a mile. Out on the porch, the cold wind bit through my coat, but it couldn't touch the fire building inside me. I finally understood what the Thanksgiving table had really meant. It wasn't about a chair or a meal. It was the first move in a quiet takeover, a way to push me out of the business, out of the family, out of my own life. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel sad. I felt awake. They wanted to modernize everything, even the name, but I was about to remind them whose name built it all in the first place. That evening, I returned to the house for the leftovers, Lydia insisted. I take her gesture of forced civility, no doubt meant to soothe her conscience. But when I stepped into the kitchen, she was already there, standing by the counter with her arms folded and that sharp, managerial tone she liked to use when she thought she was in control. "Margaret, before you take those pies, I think we should clear something up," she began, not even looking at me. I stayed silent, waiting, letting her fill the air with her own arrogance. "It's time we transition the bakery properly. You've done a lot and we appreciate it, but things are changing. Patricia and I are bringing in investors, and the brand needs fresh direction. You can still stop by, of course, but as a guest, you're not part of this family business anymore." For a moment, I just looked at her, the same young woman I had once welcomed into my home, whose wedding dress I had paid for, whose children I had babysat so she could network. Now she stood there, declaring my exile as if she were granting mercy. I felt no anger, only clarity, a sharp and perfect understanding of who she truly was. My voice came out quiet, almost tender. "You're right, dear. From tomorrow, it won't be our business anymore." She smiled, thinking she'd won. "Good. I'm glad you see reason." Some lessons don't need words. They need consequences. As I packed the pies into a paper box, I caught sight of her new manicure, glossy and pale pink, the kind of detail only people who never knead dough can keep pristine. She talked about expansion plans, about media exposure, about turning the bakery into a lifestyle brand. Each word stripped another layer of authenticity from what my husband and I had built. "Finally," I interrupted, my tone so calm it startled even her. "Lydia, do you know what makes a bakery successful?" She blinked, confused. "Good branding? Customer experience?" "No," I said. It's love, it's patience, and it's respect for the people who taught you how to make something from nothing. Without that, every cake you bake will taste like ash. She rolled her eyes and turned away, muttering something about me being too emotional. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I'd stopped being emotional the moment she pushed me from that chair. I had spent years thinking loyalty was the same as love, that sacrifice could hold a family together. I was wrong. Some people don't see sacrifice, they see opportunity. And I had given Lydia a fortune in opportunities, but from that night on, I decided she would learn what it felt like to earn things the hard way. As I left, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. The moonlight hit the Ellis & Co. sign hanging above the bakery windows, and I paused, staring at the fading gold letters. Tomorrow she planned to paint over that name, to make it hers. The thought should have hurt, but instead, it steadied me. I ran my fingers across the wooden frame and whispered softly to the empty street, "It's still mine, just not in the way she thinks." By the time I reached home, I had already made a list. Not of revenge, but of recovery. Bank accounts, ownership documents, licensing agreements all still bore my signature. Lydia had mistaken kindness for ignorance, silence for surrender. That was her mistake. And in the world of business, even family business, mistakes have costs. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to find that her empire had always been built on borrowed trust, and that I was calling in every debt. She said I wasn't part of this family business anymore. She was right, because by sunrise, it would no longer be our business, it would be mine again. In the bathroom, the hum of the vent and the soft buzz of the old vanity light made the room feel like a confessional, and when I lifted my face to the mirror, I saw every year of the bakery etched into me. A streak of flour still dusting my sleeve, hair silvered not by age alone but by 4 decades of 5 a.m. starts, and hands roughened by dough, heat, and patience. There were no tears left, only a cool steadiness moving through my chest like winter air opening a window. The steadiness of a woman who has finally stopped asking to be invited to her own table and has decided to build a better one. I pressed my fingertips to the glass as though I could touch the woman on the other side, then reached for the leather-bound recipe book. My husband had left me the one with butter stains and his slanted notes in the margins, and I laid it on the counter like a relic and a blueprint, the past and the plan in one place. That book outlasted trends, owners, managers, even marriages, and I remembered him teasing that a good crust needs both cold and heat, cold butter for structure, high flame for courage, and I realized I had finally found both. I picked up my phone, steadied my voice, and dialed the number I knew better than my own. "Edward, tomorrow morning. I want every legal tie with Daniel and Lydia revoked." And the line went quiet for a heartbeat before his measured baritone returned, asking if anything was urgent enough to act tonight. I told him urgency was the only thing left, that at 8 on the dot we would file to rescind all powers of attorney, revoke signatory privileges at First Commonwealth, amend the operating agreement to place Robert Hayes as interim manager, record a notice of ownership with the state, and prepare letters to vendors clarifying that Ellis & Co. was not for sale, not in negotiation, not under new branding, and certainly not entering any merger with Moore's Delight. He said he'd draft. I said I'd sign, and between us the air changed shape. I set the phone down and moved through the house the way you move through a kitchen at dawn, deliberate, quiet, efficient, pulling a banker's box from the hall closet and filling it not with keepsakes but with leverage. The original deed to the storefront, the UCC one from our equipment financing that still listed me as secured party, the city food service permits with my signature on every renewal, the insurance policy with me as primary insured and Lydia added only as additional interest, the lease addendum Daniel had begged me to co-sign when cash flow dipped, the merchant services contract that could be terminated by me alone, the old POS admin tablet that Lydia thought was retired but still logged me into the back end, passwords written in my husband's old cipher that only I could read, and a stack of vendor statements that proved, in black and white, who had paid and who had only promised. I texted Linda Marsh a single sentence, pull last 24 months of profit and loss, payroll, and any card charges from Lydia's cost center, and her reply came back with a timestamp and a yes, because some loyalties are earned by the way you show up before sunrise and stand shoulder to shoulder over a mixer bowl when the batch breaks. I emailed the bank manager, flagging a meeting for first light, and in the subject line I wrote, "Signature changes immediate hold," because banks do not respond to emotion, but they respect an owner who knows her documents. I opened my laptop and drafted 3 letters, short and surgical, to suppliers, reaffirming credit terms would remain intact under my sole authorization, to the staff, confirming continuity of hours and holiday pay with a reminder that kindness is policy, not preference, to customers, a note I would post on the door after the storm passed, thanking them for loving a bakery that still proofed dough the slow way and promising that the name above the window would remain the one baked into every memory they'd ever carried home in a white box tied with twine. The clock slid past midnight, and the hallway looked longer than it had in years, but the heaviness I'd been dragging since the chair scraped back at Thanksgiving was gone. In its place was a list, and a list is a rope you climb when the floor tilts. I pictured tomorrow like a service line on a busy Saturday. First station, the bank freeze, replace, reassign. Second, the attorney file, notice, serve. Third, the bakery locks, codes, cameras, a morning huddle where I would look my people in the eye and tell them the truth without venom, because generational betrayal didn't need gasoline, it needed boundaries. And somewhere between the second and third station I would slide the key into the office drawer and lift my husband's metal stamp, the one that pressed Ellis into hot crust, and I would remember how he used to say that names are promises you keep out loud. I rinsed my hands, massaged the knuckles the way bakers do when the ache settles deep, and stared once more at the woman in the mirror, the lines softer now, not because anything had eased, but because I had decided to stop pleading for what already belonged to me. The humiliation at the table had been public, but the resurrection would be private and procedural, a choreography of signatures and locks and passwords that would turn their whispers about modernization into a lesson about foundations. I turned off the light, slid the recipe book into my bag like armor, and let the house go dark around me, not as a retreat but as a reset, knowing that a few hours of sleep would rise into a morning where the first thing I do before coffee, before cinnamon, before ovens, was lay my claim back on the world and mean it. At 7 sharp the next morning, I unlocked the side door of the bakery and was met by the smell of cooling bread and the low hum of refrigerator sounds that had always felt like home but now echoed like evidence. The first person through the door was Linda Marsh, my accountant of 15 years, still in her wool coat, clutching a travel mug and a folder thick with paper. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You said urgent, Margaret. I brought everything," she said, sliding into the small office behind the counter. We didn't need coffee to stay awake. The adrenaline of betrayal was enough. I pulled the ledger from the bottom drawer and laid it flat between us. "We're going to make a list," I said. "Everything I've poured into this family, every dollar that left my hand with trust attached to it." Linda adjusted her glasses and began reading numbers aloud, tapping her pen against the paper as she calculated. "Wedding expenses, $35,000, she started. I nodded, remembering the spring Daniel married Lydia, the rented barn filled with fairy lights and a band that charged more than I made in a month. Lydia had cried when she saw the cake I'd made myself, a 6-tier vanilla masterpiece with sugared violets, and she'd hugged me, whispering, "You're more of a mother to me than my own." That was the first debt I'd paid without realizing it was one. "Next," Linda continued, "the house mortgage, $280,000, co-signed and guaranteed by you." I could still see the realtor's smile the day we signed the papers, the way Daniel's hand had trembled as he thanked me, promising to refinance within 2 years. That was 8 years ago. "Bakery renovation," Linda said, scanning another column. $85,000. That one stung most. I had mortgaged my own cottage to fund Lydia's rebranding vision: new counters, marble-topped islands, gold lettering on the windows. She said we needed to keep up with trends, that customers bought image before flavor. I had believed her, as if butter and love weren't enough to fill a shop. Linda flipped another page. Marketing and loan guarantee $150,000 even. She looked up at me. That includes the Moore's Delight partnership proposal she submitted last month. My jaw tightened. So she already moved on it? Yes, Linda said quietly. The papers were drafted under your business entity. If she'd succeeded, the Moore Corporation would have absorbed Ellis & Co. in full within 60 days. I leaned back in my chair, the wooden frame creaking under the weight of the realization. They hadn't just planned to replace my name, they'd planned to erase me from the business before I even knew it. Linda tapped her calculator and said softly, "That's $550,000, Margaret. $500,000. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving me like the end of a long prayer. $500,000, I repeated, for a lesson in gratitude. She gave a small, sad smile. That's an expensive education. We went through each item line by line, documenting the evidence: bank statements, receipts, wire transfers, co-signed contracts. Every number was a breadcrumb leading back to one truth. I had built them, funded them, protected them, and they had used that protection as cover to cut me out. Linda printed the summary and slid it across the desk. The paper was warm from the machine, heavy with all the years it represented. I folded it neatly, placed it in a manila envelope, and wrote across the top in thick black ink, "Assets for reclamation." "Are you sure you want to do this?" Linda asked finally, her voice softer now. "You could still sit them down." "Talk?" I shook my head. "You can't talk someone into decency. They have to find it after the fall." She nodded, understanding more than she said. "Then we'll start with the accounts," she said. "Once the bank removes their access, they'll realize how serious this is." I stood and looked through the office window at the shop floor. Robert was arranging croissants in the front case, unaware of the quiet war beginning in the back room. The customers outside would never know that behind every golden crust was a story of loyalty, misplaced, and lessons learned too late. "Freeze every joint account," I told Linda. "Stop payroll transfers to Lydia's name. Move the corporate cards under my personal authorization and flag all vendor accounts for my approval only. If she tries to place an order, I want to know before the flour leaves the warehouse." Linda nodded, typing furiously. The printer hummed again, spitting out authorization forms and banking letters. The rhythm of it felt like a heartbeat, steady and certain. When we were done, I signed each page with the same deliberate care I used to roll pastry: firm pressure, clean edges, no hesitation. By the time the last signature dried, the air in the room had shifted. I wasn't the woman on the floor anymore. I was the woman at the head of her own table again. As Linda packed her files, she glanced at the framed photo on the wall, me and my husband, on the bakery's opening day, covered in flour and laughter. "He'd be proud of you, you know," she said quietly. I smiled, a small, tired curve of truth. "Maybe. But I think he'd be prouder that I finally learned the value of my own name." The morning light hit the gold letters on the front window, Ellis & Co., and for the first time in months, they didn't look faded. They looked like a promise I was ready to keep. By dawn the next day, the city was still half asleep, a soft mist clinging to the windows as if even the morning hesitated to wake. But I didn't. I had a list taped to the kitchen counter, every step outlined in blue ink, and by 7:30 I was walking into the First Commonwealth branch downtown. A folder of signed authorizations pressed against my chest like armor. The marble floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The smell of coffee and printer toner mixed with the faint chill of money-moving hands. I had been here 100 times before, always as a guarantor, a helper, a safety net. This time, I was something else entirely, the rightful owner reclaiming her ground. The manager, Mr. Talbot, looked up from his desk when he saw me. Mrs. Ellis, good morning. I didn't expect. You will today, I said gently, sliding the papers across his desk. Effective immediately. Remove Daniel and Lydia Ellis from all business and joint accounts under Ellis & Co. Bakery. Transfer sole authorization to me. He scanned the documents, lips tightening as he realized everything was in order. This includes their payroll disbursements? He asked. Especially those, I replied. Freeze the corporate credit cards, revoke their access to the digital banking platform, and cancel any pending transfers with their signatures. He nodded slowly, glancing up at me with something that looked almost like respect. Understood, Mrs. Ellis. I'll process it before the hour is over. I left the bank lighter, not from relief but from precision. Every act that morning had to be as clean and sharp as the edge of a chef's knife, no hesitation, no emotion, just movement. My next stop was the lawyer's office. Edward Shaw was already waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a neat stack of legal envelopes. You weren't joking last night, he said. I never joke about recipes or revenge, I answered. He smiled faintly, sliding the first envelope forward. Revocation of powers of attorney. You'll need to initial each page. Once filed, they'll no longer have authority to sign contracts, represent the company, or access proprietary materials. I signed every line in silence. The second envelope contained new management papers appointing Robert Hayes as general manager. He's worked for you, how long? Edward asked. 19 years, I said. And he's never once stolen credit or burned a batch. Edward nodded. Loyalty baked in, he murmured, and stamped the documents. By mid-morning, I was back at the bakery. The usual bustle of deliveries and ovens filled the air, but I could sense something shifting beneath it, a quiet recalibration, like dough settling before the rise. Robert was arranging trays of cinnamon rolls when I called him into the back office. Robert, I said, handing him the signed papers, as of today, you're the general manager of Ellis & Co. You'll run daily operations, approve orders, oversee staff, and maintain quality control. You'll report directly to me. His eyes widened. Mrs. Ellis, I don't know what to say. Say yes, I told him, smiling, and make sure the ovens are hot by 6. He laughed, a sound of both gratitude and disbelief. Then came the physical work, the kind that seals decisions into reality. I called the locksmith. Within an hour, the old brass locks were replaced with new stainless ones. The digital keypad code that Lydia had memorized was reset. The alarm company technician updated the passphrase from Danley 2020 to something simpler, truer, 1979 Love, the year my husband and I opened our first shop. Every turn of the key felt like reclaiming a heartbeat. When Lydia arrived around noon, she found the front doors bolted and the sign flipped to closed for maintenance. She pounded on the glass, her voice muffled but furious. I stood in the hallway behind the counter, watching through the lace curtain. Robert, ever composed, stepped forward. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis, he told her through the door. You'll need to speak with Margaret about access. Lydia's jaw dropped. Excuse me? Margaret? This is my bakery. Robert didn't flinch. Not anymore. I turned away before she could see me. I wasn't interested in her theatrics. This wasn't about punishment, it was about peace. I walked through the kitchen, the sound of mixers and timers filling the air, and felt a stillness I hadn't known in years. No tension, no entitlement, just work and purpose. My husband used to say that every kitchen needs order, and I finally understood what he meant. Chaos doesn't belong where creation lives. By evening, every document was filed, every password changed, every lock turned. The staff had been briefed, and those who had once tiptoed around Lydia now smiled with quiet relief. The bakery, for the first time in months, felt alive again. As I wiped the flour from my hands, I looked around the spotless kitchen rows of cooling racks, the hum of ovens steady as a heartbeat, and whispered to no one in particular, "A kitchen needs order." And mine just got it back. Outside, The last light of day touched the gold lettering on the window, Ellis & Co. Bakery, and for a fleeting moment I could almost see my husband's reflection beside mine, nodding with quiet approval. The storm had begun, but inside those walls, everything was finally in its right place. By Monday morning, the tremors of my quiet decisions began to ripple outward, first through the financial system, then through Lydia's life like a slow, deliberate earthquake. The first phone call hit her at 8:17 a.m., just as she was dropping the children off at preschool. The voice on the other end was clinical, polite, merciless. "Mrs. Ellis, this is First Commonwealth Bank. We're calling to confirm that all joint and subsidiary accounts under Ellis & Co. Bakery have been restricted pending ownership review. Your access has been revoked effective immediately." There was a pause, the kind of silence that swallows reason. Then Lydia's voice, sharp enough to cut through static. "What do you mean revoked? I'm co-owner." "I'm afraid that's no longer accurate, ma'am. The business registration was amended this morning by Mrs. Margaret Ellis. Our records now list her as the sole proprietor." "She can't do that," Lydia snapped. "Actually, she can," came the even reply. "She holds primary ownership on all documentation, including the mortgage, business license, and credit facilities." The line went dead. By noon, her phone had filled with notifications, declined transactions, frozen accounts, a string of automated emails from vendors canceling standing orders due to authorization mismatch. She tried to use the corporate card at the coffee shop, declined. She called Daniel, frantic. "Your mother's cut us off," she hissed. "The cards, the bank, everything. She's frozen it all." Daniel was still in bed, the blinds drawn, his voice groggy. "That can't be right. She wouldn't." "She did. She revoked our signatures, Daniel. Even the insurance login is locked. I can't pay suppliers. The oven repair company wants cash." He sat up, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe there's some misunderstanding. I'll call her." "No!" Lydia snapped. "You'll listen. This is what happens when you let her control everything. She's ruined us." But before Daniel could respond, another call came through, this time from the mortgage lender. "Mr. Ellis, we're contacting you regarding the property at 38 Willow Lane. The automatic payments from the guarantor's account have ceased. Unless alternative payment arrangements are made within 15 days, foreclosure proceedings will begin." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Wait, what guarantor?" "Mrs. Margaret Ellis," the voice said matter-of-factly. "She's withdrawn financial support and rescinded her co-signature." He hung up without replying. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. By evening, the facade of their new life began to crack like sugar glass. Lydia stormed through the house, grabbing stacks of paperwork, trying to find something, anything that gave her leverage. But every document, every contract, every lease bore my name at the top. The bakery was mine. The house was mine. Even the bakery's equipment, down to the ovens and mixers, had been purchased under my business line. When the utilities company called to confirm that the account holder had changed, Lydia finally broke. "You can't just erase me," she screamed into the phone. "I built that bakery." The customer service agent paused. "Ma'am, according to these records, you were listed as an employee, not an owner. Your payroll has also been discontinued." It was the first time Lydia realized what I had been all along, her shield, her structure, her safety net, and that she'd cut it herself. Daniel came home late that night, his tie loosened, his eyes hollow. "I went to the bank," he said quietly. "They showed me the filings. Everything's legal." Lydia looked at him, her expression half rage, half disbelief. "So you're just going to accept it? She's your mother, Daniel. You're her son." He sat heavily on the couch. "Yeah, and maybe I should have remembered that before I let you talk to her like that." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lydia's voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with fury. "Don't you dare blame this on me." "I'm not blaming," he said softly. "I'm just done pretending." The next morning, she tried one last desperate call to her mother, Patricia Moore. "Mom," Lydia began, forcing a calm tone. We're in a bind. Could you loan us something until the accounts are sorted? Just temporary. Patricia's reply was a cold knife through the line. A woman who disrespects family deserves her fall. I warned you not to bite the hand that fed you. Now you get to learn what hunger feels like. Mom, please. I'm not bailing you out of arrogance, Lydia. Actions have interest rates, and yours just came due. The call ended. Lydia dropped the phone onto the kitchen table and stared at the wall, the sound of her own breathing louder than the ticking clock. Within a week, the house began to change around them. Notices arrived, foreclosure warnings, repossession letters, polite but final notifications of termination. The laughter of Ethan and Chloe, once constant, turned into quiet confusion. "Mommy, why can't we go to the bakery anymore?" Chloe asked one night, tugging at Lydia's sleeve. Lydia forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because Grandma's taking care of it now, sweetheart." Daniel packed boxes in silence. The family that had once dined under chandeliers was now sorting through what would fit into the back of a borrowed pickup truck. The marble counters, the stainless steel appliances, the framed photos of a business that wasn't theirs all stayed behind. When the movers came, Lydia stood on the porch and looked back at the house she'd once claimed as her domain. The golden light from the front window hit the sold pending sign on the lawn, casting its reflection across her face like a verdict. Daniel closed the truck bed, turned the key, and started the engine. The sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires filled the silence. As they drove away, Lydia turned to look at the bakery at the end of the street, my bakery, its front window gleaming with early sunlight. Inside, Robert was arranging pastries in the display case, a new sign hanging above the counter. Ellis & Co. Bakery, family not franchise. Lydia's throat tightened. For the first time in her life, she understood the difference between ownership and belonging. By the time they reached the city limits, she wasn't angry anymore, just empty. And somewhere across town, in a warm kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and rising dough, I set a tray on the counter, wiped my hands on my apron, and murmured to myself, "A kitchen needs order." And mine just got it back. The first snow of December dusted the sidewalks like powdered sugar, the kind that made every street corner smell faintly like Christmas and warm bread. I was kneading dough in the quiet of the early morning when I heard the soft chime of the front door, too early for customers, too hesitant for staff. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the front room. Standing there, wrapped in a camel-colored coat and clutching a leather handbag like it might protect her from the cold, was Patricia Moore, Lydia's mother. For a moment we simply looked at each other, two women bound by one shared failure family. Her eyes, usually sharp with judgment, looked different now, softer, older. "Margaret," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I owe you an apology." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch long enough to make it honest. "I saw everything," she continued quietly. "The way Lydia treated you, the way Daniel stood by and let it happen. I should have spoken up that night, but I was too proud or too afraid. You didn't deserve that." I folded my arms, studying her. "You raised her," I said finally. She nodded. "And I failed her, but I don't intend to fail her children. Or you." Her words hung in the air like the scent of cooling pastries, unexpected, disarming. Then she opened her bag and slid a folder across the counter. "These are acquisition documents from Moore's Delight. Lydia tried to push them through last quarter. I stopped the final signing after what happened, but it gave me an idea." I raised an eyebrow. "An idea?" "A partnership," she said, her tone steadier now. "Not corporate, not greedy. Two women who built their families and businesses with their bare hands. You bring the craft, I bring the distribution network. We reopen under a new banner, Ellis & Moore Artisan Bakery." The name felt strange in my mouth, two legacies, once at odds, now woven together. I looked at her, searching for any trace of manipulation, but all I saw was the weariness of a woman who had also paid the price of silence. "Why now?" I asked. Patricia smiled faintly. "Because Lydia thought she was entitled to everything you built, but she never understood what made it valuable. You did. and I'm tired of watching men and foolish daughters erase the women who actually make things work. That I understood perfectly. We shook hands over the counter, and just like that, something in the air shifted. Not forgiveness, not friendship, something older and stronger, mutual recognition. By the end of the week, the new signage was ordered. The name Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery appeared in brushed brass lettering across the front window, catching the light like a quiet declaration. The town took notice immediately. Robert Hayes, still wearing his flour-dusted apron, stood beside me as we unveiled it. "You sure about this, Mrs. Ellis?" he asked with a grin. "The last Moore nearly burned this place down." I chuckled. This one knows how to keep the ovens running. Robert's loyalty had never wavered, and with the expansion came new responsibility. I handed him the revised management contract. "You're not just managing anymore, Robert," I said. "You're co-managing. You've earned it." He blinked, taken aback. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep the croissants consistent," I replied. Linda Marsh joined us that same afternoon, her glasses perched low on her nose, a stack of accounting binders in her arms. "So," she said with mock sternness, "are we keeping this one solvent, or do I need to build a second ledger for miracles?" "Both," I said. "We're going to grow, but we're going to do it right this time." The weeks that followed felt like breathing clean air after years underground. Patricia's business acumen and connections brought in wholesale contracts with hotels and cafes across the county. My recipes brought the customers back, the ones who'd stopped by out of loyalty, curiosity, or quiet satisfaction at seeing justice rise like bread in a warm oven. On Saturdays, lines began forming outside the shop again, winding past the corner and down Willow Street. The regulars, nurses from the hospital, families from the church, students from the college filled the room with chatter and laughter that had been missing for too long. One older gentleman leaned over the counter one morning and said, "Good to see the Ellis name back where it belongs." I smiled and corrected him gently, pointing at the sign. "Not just Ellis," I said, "Ellis and Moore." Patricia, standing beside me, smiled in quiet agreement. We'd brought back the old recipes: cinnamon pull-aparts, butter toffee scones, Martha's classic apple pie, but we added new ones too, things neither of us would have dared before. Rosemary focaccia with sea salt, dark chocolate truffle loaves, lemon cream eclairs with candied zest. Tradition and innovation side by side like us. Even the staff began to reflect that balance. Robert handled production, Linda oversaw finance, and Patricia ran distribution logistics with a precision that reminded me of my younger self. I focused on what I loved most: the craft. One afternoon, a reporter from the Kalispell Tribune stopped by. "Mrs. Ellis," she asked, "is it true you rebuilt the bakery after your family tried to take it from you?" I looked around at the bustling shop, the shelves lined with fresh bread, the warmth of community that had returned like sunlight after a storm. "No," I said softly. "I didn't rebuild it. I restored it to what it always was, a place built on respect." That quote ran on the front page the next day, under a photograph of me and Patricia standing shoulder to shoulder, flour on our aprons and pride in our eyes. By Christmas, we were filling orders faster than the ovens could bake. We donated leftover loaves to the Veterans Shelter every Sunday and hosted a free cookie workshop for local kids. The town rallied around us, not out of pity, but out of admiration. They'd seen betrayal, but now they were seeing something better. Sometimes, after closing, Patricia and I would sit in the office with tea, the ledger open between us. "Do you ever think," she'd ask, "that maybe our daughters had to fall so we could find each other?" I'd sip my tea, watching the reflection of the ovens flicker on the window. "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather think they fell so we could rise twice as strong." Outside, snow drifted past the golden sign Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery, and inside, the warmth of second chances filled every corner. It wasn't revenge that made the business thrive again. It was balance. Two women who had once stood on opposite sides of pride now stood together, turning flour and fire into something that would last, It was a crisp Saturday morning in late February, sunlight filtering through the front windows of Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery, catching the tiny dusting of flour in the air like glitter. The scent of warm brioche and caramelized butter filled the shop, mingling with the quiet hum of customers chatting over coffee. Everything in the bakery, the golden shelves, the polished counters, the laughter of regulars felt alive, balanced, and peaceful. Then the bell above the door rang, sharp as a knife. When I looked up, time seemed to fold back a year. Lydia stood in the doorway, pale and drawn, her once immaculate hair pulled into a loose bun, her coat wrinkled at the edges. Daniel followed behind, slower, his eyes heavy with the kind of shame that doesn't fade with sleep. They looked like two ghosts haunting a place that no longer belonged to them. The chatter in the bakery faltered. Robert froze mid-sentence, holding a tray of croissants. Patricia, arranging muffins at the display, went still beside me. The air changed an electric silence, replacing the comfort of routine. Lydia stepped forward first, clutching her purse like it was the last remnant of pride she had left. "Margaret," she began, voice trembling but still carrying that edge of entitlement, "we need to talk." I didn't move. "About what?" "About everything," she said. "The bakery, the house, the misunderstanding." A quiet laugh escaped me, not cruel but tired. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you call shoving someone from their own table?" Her face reddened, but she pressed on. "We were wrong. I was wrong. Please, you've proved your point. The bakery is thriving and we've lost everything." "The children." At that, Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice low and uncertain. "Mom, please hear us out. We've learned our lesson. We just need a chance to make things right." I looked at him for a long time, my heart folding in on itself at the word mom. There was a time that word could have undone me, softened every edge. But not now. Not after everything that had risen and burned away between us. The customers were pretending not to listen, their eyes fixed on their pastries, but their ears turned sharply toward the scene. I let the moment stretch. Then I set down my towel and stepped forward, every movement measured, calm. "You pushed me from my own table," I said quietly, my voice steady as marble. "Do you remember that, Lydia?" Her lips parted, but no words came. "You said, 'This seat is for my mother.' And so I stood up. I walked away from that table and everything attached to it. Do you know what I found when I did?" She shook her head weakly. "My dignity," I said. "Something you can't buy, can't inherit, and can't fake." Lydia's breath caught, and for a moment I thought she might break down right there in front of the pastry case, but pride dies slow. "Margaret, please," she whispered. "We're not here for a scene. Just give us a chance to start over." "Start over?" I echoed. "That's exactly what I did, and you're standing in it." Patricia, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward, her posture straight and unflinching. "Lydia," she said softly, "when you humiliated this woman, you humiliated me too. You thought power came from ownership, but it comes from integrity. You lost both." Lydia turned to her mother, her voice breaking. "Mom, please don't." "I already have," Patricia interrupted. "I'm done rescuing you from the messes you make. You have to live with this one." The bakery was completely still now. Even the espresso machine had gone silent, as if the whole room were holding its breath. I turned back to the counter, opened a thick folder waiting beside the register, and laid it flat. The crisp sound of paper filled the air. Lydia's eyes darted to it. "What is that?" "The final transfer of ownership," I said. "Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery, permanent co-ownership between myself and Patricia Moore." Daniel took a small step forward. "Mom, please don't." I met his gaze and saw the boy he once was, the one who used to stand on a stool beside me to help frost cupcakes, his face dusted with sugar. That memory hit hard, but the present was harder. "You made your choice, Daniel," I said softly. "When you stayed silent that night, you chose your comfort over my respect. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just finished." His shoulders dropped. "I know," he whispered. Without another word, I signed the document, the pen gliding smoothly across the paper, the ink a dark, final line under a long story. Patricia signed next, her hand steady as a judge's gavel. Then I turned the papers toward Robert, who stepped forward to notarize. The seal pressed down with a quiet click, echoing louder than any applause. Lydia's lip trembled. "So that's it? You're just cutting us out completely?" I looked at her one last time. "No," I said. "You cut yourselves out the moment you thought I was dispensable." Her face crumpled, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, truly small. Not because she'd lost wealth, but because she'd lost the illusion that made her feel big. Daniel gently took her arm, guiding her toward the door. He paused before stepping out, turning back to me with wet eyes. "You were right, Mom," he said quietly. "It wasn't about the seat. It was about respect. And I lost both." "You can still earn one of them back," I told him. "But not here. Not today." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that holds more regret than words ever could, and followed Lydia outside. Through the front window, I watched them cross the street, their figures swallowed by the afternoon crowd. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or triumph, just peace. A clean, bright peace, like the air after a long storm. Patricia placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled that with more grace than I would have." I smiled faintly. "Grace is just restraint dressed in patience." Around us, the bakery began to breathe again, the hum of conversation returning, the scent of butter filling the space between moments. Robert carried another tray from the kitchen, Linda passed behind the counter with a ledger, and I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't holding on to the past. I turned the open ledger toward Patricia. "Let's make it official," I said. "We're not just surviving anymore, we're building something that lasts." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Together." As I wiped a smudge of flour from the counter, I caught my reflection in the window, older, yes, but steady. Behind me, the golden letters of the sign gleamed in the afternoon light. Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery. Family, not franchise. And in that reflection, I saw not a woman who'd lost her family, but one who had redefined it on her own terms. 1 year later, the city of Boston had changed in quiet, subtle ways, but none more so than the corner of Tremont and Pine, where the little storefront of Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery had become something of a landmark. On Sunday mornings, people still queued before sunrise, clutching coffee cups and chatting in the winter air as the scent of apple pie and buttercrust drifted out into the street. What they didn't know was that the woman behind the counter, the silver-haired widow with soft hands dusted in flour, had once been pushed from her own table and told she no longer belonged. Now, she belonged everywhere. That morning, a producer from Boston Morning View stopped by in a blue parka, holding a clipboard and a shy smile. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, "we'd be honored if you'd come on our show next week. You've become quite the inspiration around here. People love your story, the widow who rebuilt not just her bakery but herself." I almost laughed, but I saw she meant it sincerely. "I didn't rebuild," I said, smiling. "I just went back to doing what I loved before life got complicated, baking and believing in people." And so, the following Thursday, I found myself sitting under studio lights, the cameras warm, the smell of fresh pastry rising from the sample tray in front of me. The host, a kind man in his 50s with too much energy for that hour of the morning, introduced me as Margaret Ellis, co-founder of Boston's Best Family Bakery and creator of the award-winning apple custard pie that took the city by storm. He leaned in with a grin. "Tell us, Mrs. Ellis, what's your secret ingredient?" I smiled and folded my hands, remembering my late husband James, the man who used to roll dough beside me, humming Sinatra, his hands steady even after long days at the mill. "It was his recipe, really," I said softly. "He used to say the secret to good bread wasn't sugar or butter, but patience. He called it love kneaded with respect. That's what we still do every single morning." The audience clapped, and the host nodded with a smile that said he'd felt the truth of it. Camera zoomed in on the golden pie beside me, flaky, warm, and glistening in the studio light. But what they couldn't capture was the quiet satisfaction behind it, the knowledge that the recipe, like the woman who made it, had risen again after being torn apart. When the segment aired, something unexpected happened. Letters began arriving, hundreds of them, some from widows, others from single mothers, even young women fresh out of college, all saying the same thing. "You made me believe I can start over." I read every one of them, sometimes late into the night after closing the shop. And one evening, over tea with Patricia and Linda, I said the thought aloud that had been growing for weeks. What if we could help them do it too? Linda adjusted her glasses, already knowing where my mind was going. "You mean financially?" "And practically," I said. "Business mentoring, baking, crafts, small ventures. There are too many women who've been told they're too old or too broken to begin again. I want to show them they're wrong." Patricia's eyes softened. "You want to start a foundation?" "Yes," I said simply. "We'll call it the Ellis Fund in honor of the man who taught me that dignity and dough both rise when treated with care." Within months, the Ellis Fund for Widowed Women Entrepreneurs became a registered nonprofit. We hosted small workshops in the bakery after hours, the scent of warm bread filling the air as women of every age learned how to price a product, register a business, balance a budget, and perhaps most importantly, believe in themselves again. Some baked, others painted, some opened florists or handmade soap stalls. Every one of them walked out of our kitchen with something new confidence. By autumn, Boston Life magazine named Ellis and Moore Artisan Bakery Best Family Bakery in Boston, citing our heart-centered mission and the warmest apple pie this side of heaven. They featured a photograph of me, Patricia, Robert, and Linda standing in front of the shop, our aprons dusted with flour, our smiles wide and real. When the article came out, the line outside doubled. But more than the customers, it was the letters that meant everything. One in particular came from a woman in Maine who wrote, "After my husband passed, I thought my life ended too. Then I watched your interview. The next morning, I bought flour, yeast, and courage. I opened a stall at our town market last week. I named it Second Rise. Thank you for reminding me that we can all start again." I pinned that letter on the notice board in the office, the same spot where the foreclosure notice had once hung a year before. Every morning now, I wake before dawn. I roll the dough slowly, feeling the same rhythm in my hands that James once had. Patricia comes in by 6, her lipstick perfect even under a hairnet. Robert hums as he prepares the ovens, and Linda brings her thermos of black coffee, muttering about invoices but smiling all the same. By 7, the first customers arrive, and the air outside fills with the scent of apples and cinnamon, sugar melting on butter crust. People walking by pause just to inhale, smiling without knowing why. It's not just the smell of pie, it's the smell of freedom. Freedom earned through humility. Freedom shaped by loss and baked in the slow, patient heat of time. Sometimes, when the first rays of sunlight touch the bakery sign, I stand by the window and watch the reflection of the letters Ellis and Moore glow gold against the glass. There's no bitterness left, no echo of the past cruelty, only gratitude. I think of Lydia sometimes, and Daniel too, not with anger, but with a quiet hope that they've learned what life had to teach them. That somewhere, maybe, they smell apple pie, and remember that love, real love, is always needed with respect. As I set the first tray of the day in the oven, I whisper to the empty kitchen, "Thank you, James, for teaching me how to rise again." The timer ticks softly, the air fills with warmth, and outside the street begins to wake. People hurry by, smiling as the aroma reaches them, a fragrance rich and steady, the scent of a woman who lost everything except herself and built something far greater in its place, a life of her own making. It was late spring when the letter arrived, no return address, just a familiar handwriting that made my breath catch for a moment. I stood in the kitchen, apron still dusted with flour, morning light spilling across the counter as I held it in my hands. The paper was slightly creased, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before being sent. I hesitated before opening it. After all this time, I had stopped expecting anything from Lydia. Life had a way of teaching its lessons with or without apologies. Still, curiosity and perhaps something softer made me break the seal. Inside, in her unmistakable slanted handwriting, were just a few paragraphs. No explanations, no excuses, just the truth, written in ink that looked a little like repentance. Dear Margaret, you didn't ruin me. You rebuilt me. For months, I blamed you for everything, losing the bakery, the house, the life I thought I deserved. But somewhere between working double shifts at a diner and helping Ethan with his homework, I began to understand what you meant that night when you said, "A kitchen needs order." You were never punishing me. You were teaching me. I finally opened my own little stand at the local farmer's market. Nothing big, just pies and muffins. But every time I knead the dough, I hear your voice in my head reminding me that respect, like bread, takes time to rise. Thank you for letting me fall so I could learn how to stand again. With gratitude, Lydia. I read the letter twice before setting it down. For a long while, I just stood there, the hum of the ovens and the distant chatter of the morning crowd filling the silence. Patricia came in from the front, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everything all right?" she asked. I smiled faintly. Just a letter from someone learning how to rise again. She nodded knowingly. "Then you taught her well." I folded the paper carefully and walked to the back of the bakery, where an old tin box sat on a high shelf, one that had belonged to my late husband, James. Inside were things too precious for display: a faded photograph of our wedding day, the ring he'd slipped on my finger nearly 40 years ago, and a few recipes written in his looping handwriting. I added the letter to the collection, tucking it between the photo and the ring. "Rest easy, my love," I whispered. "You'd be proud of how far we've all come." When I closed the lid, the faint scent of old paper and vanilla sugar filled the air, memories sealed in tin and time. That evening, after closing, I stood by the front window, watching the last light fade over Tremont Street. The golden sign, Ellis, and More Artisan Bakery glowed softly in the dusk. Robert was sweeping near the counter, humming under his breath. Linda was locking up the ledger in her careful way. Patricia leaned in the doorway with a cup of tea, looking content. For the first time in many years, I felt completely still inside, not victorious, not vindicated, just at peace. I thought about Lydia's words again. "You didn't ruin me. You rebuilt me." Maybe that was true for both of us, because the truth is, we don't just rebuild bakeries or businesses after betrayal. We rebuild ourselves layer by layer, like the folds in a perfect pastry. And just like dough, it takes time, warmth, and a little pressure to become something whole again. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the display case behind rows of golden loaves, apple pies, and croissants catching the last bit of streetlight through the glass. To anyone passing by, it looked like a simple bakery, but to me it was everything, proof that respect once lost can still be earned, that dignity once trampled can still stand tall. As I pulled my coat over my shoulders and reached for the door, I glanced one last time at the counter, the place where everything had fallen apart, and where it had all begun again. And then, softly, to no one in particular, I said what had become my truth, the words that carried me through every rise, every fall, every quiet dawn in that little kitchen. Respect is not inherited, it's earned. Just like every loaf I ever baked. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped into the cool night air, the scent of cinnamon and apple following me like a promise. What about you? If your daughter-in-law humiliated you in front of your family, would you forgive, fight back, or walk away like Margaret did? Share your thoughts below. Because sometimes the way we rise after betrayal says more about us than the people who pushed us down.